Welcome back. Here we are in our next lesson, lesson number 6, and we're going to talk about describing pairs of angles. So the learning intentions we have are to identify and use pairs of angles, and for you to be successful, you want to be able to identify what's known as complementary and supplementary angles, as well as identify linear pairs and vertical angles, and finally, finding angle measures in pairs of angles. So you heard some of those words, and those are the key vocab that we're looking at. Adjacent angles, complementary angles, supplementary angles, linear pair, and vertical angles. So we'll start by something called adjacent angles. Adjacent angles basically means that there's two angles that are next to each other. So they lie side by side, and they have what's called a common side. So that is very key when you're talking about adjacent angles. So notice that there's an angle that's created here, which is angle 5, and then angle 6 is there. Angles 5 and 6 are adjacent because they share a common side, which means they also have a common vertex, right? The point where they're basically meeting there. So those are adjacent angles. It's important to know this, and you'll see why when we start looking at some of the other angles. These are not adjacent. Why are they not adjacent? Well, clearly they do not share a common side, and they do not have a common vertex, so they're not adjacent. So we have these two types of angles, complementary and supplementary angles. Complementary angles are going to be any two angles, whether they are adjacent or non-adjacent, whose angle measures add up to 90 degrees. So if the two angle measures add to 90 degrees, then you have complementary angles. Whereas if the two angle measures added together gives you 180 degrees, then you have what's known as supplementary angles. So complementary angles add up to 90 degrees, and supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. Okay? For some people, there's sometimes a little trick you might be able to use, which is supplementary. Now, you don't have to use this. It's an S, right? So it almost reminds you that you could have an 8, so it's almost like an 8, right? Whereas complementary is only going to be half of that, so you would just have half of 180, which is 90. So you don't have to use that as a little trick, but for some people that might help. All right, so go ahead and give this a try. Now, linear pairs and vertical angles. So a linear pair is going to be two angles, right? Two angles that form a straight line. But they need to be adjacent angles to create a linear pair. Okay? They need to be adjacent angles to create a linear pair. So with the linear pair, again, they have the common side and the angles whose non-common sides, which means the parts that they don't share, form a straight line. Okay? So that's different than saying two angles are supplementary. Because when they're supplementary, we're talking about the angle measures being added together. Here, we're talking about creating a line with the two angles. Then we have something that's called vertical pairs or vertical angles. The vertical angles are basically when you create this X here, they're the angles that are opposite to each other. Those are vertical angles. So angle 4 and 5 are vertical angles. Angles 3 and 6 are vertical angles. So vertical angles are usually just across from each other, and they'll make the X. So when you see that, then you know you can have vertical angles. Well, that's pretty much it. This leads you to your choice of whether you start your practice now, or if you would like, you can wait until class tomorrow to be able to do that. So let's take a look at what the practice options are. So here, your practice will start on page 50. And again, you'll have the 3 levels. So here's level 1. Here's level 2. And here is level 3. Don't forget, you can start on whatever level you would like, wherever you feel like you're comfortable. If it's not enough practice at one level, then do some more in a different level. Okay, and don't forget to ask questions if you need any help.